Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me in this attempt to take web services where Microsoft probably did not intend us to go ever. Should I take my black belt off, or are you okay with this? Good. The session is titled Web Services Black Belt, and it's going to be about tips and tricks which you will not find in the documentation. Stuff that is kind of undocumented but is still legal to do. Stuff that you probably did not know it was possible, or maybe you did. And you will not find here any of the tricks you might have read somewhere on the internet, on Mibuso or blogs. So I made sure that most of this here is presented for the first time. A little bit about myself. My name is Vjekoslav Babic. I come from Croatia. I'm a consultant, a blogger, an author. I wrote a book which 2 days ago was rendered utterly irrelevant with the RTM of 2013. You can follow me on Twitter. You can read my blog. Is there anybody here who has visited my blog ever? Okay, thank you. Thank you for attending. So at the beginning of this year, I actually started with a series of first bugs and then a couple of tips and tricks with web services. So nothing of the content there is actually repeated here. So this is going to be new, I hope. About web services, when Microsoft has released web services, it was a huge addition to Microsoft Dynamics stack. It was a real monster. However, when you take a look at what it can actually do, it's like a tiny Godzilla, not like a big one. So that's just web services alone. But they have been adding stuff to the stack as we went on, which actually turned it into a slightly bigger one, but it's still not, you know, the real thing. So web services plus .NET makes a lot more things possible than was possible earlier with only web services. However, to make a real thing, you have to use web services plus .NET plus testability. And now, if you ask yourself the same question that this guy is asking himself, well, I can say like, just in a minute, Mr. President. So, let's start with SOAP web services. How many of you have consumed NAV SOAP web services? Okay. Did it always work easy? Was it like, it does everything? Not exactly. So let's take a look at what this little guy can do for us. So it can do a lot of things. We can call pages. We can call code units. Not all code units, though. Only specific ones. But still, whatever we want to call, we can, if we want. However, there are certain limitations. There are things which are blocking us from achieving something that would be possible, for example, by using a role-tailored client or a web client or something else. So I have here three groups of not issues, but limitations, which actually prevent us to do a lot. So first, I would start with the fact that the web services are stateless. This means that when you call a web service, every call you make is just a new call. So the web service tier does not know anything about you when you call them. Not who you are, not what you did the last time. It's just when you call a customer support and you say like, hello, this is me, and they say, well, I don't know who you are. It's just a completely new call. We're going to see how that works. So not even single instance code unit help here. Because the single instance is also single instance per session. And every single web service call is a single session, which means that as soon as your web service call is completed, your single instance code unit also goes out of scope and basically disappears together with your session, which disappeared. Another thing is that web services are unilingual. It wasn't always like that. That was a bug fixed by Microsoft sometime mid last year. Earlier, you could have web services respond in any language, which means if you're using, for example, Danish, web services would work in Danish. If you work in English, they would respond in English. However, at one moment, Microsoft decided that this is not good, and it definitely had its reasons. So they basically replaced that with just a single language. Web services always respond in English. And also there are a couple other limitations, like, for example, work date is always set to the system date. It might not be a big issue, but sometimes it may. Then, for example, if you're using page web services, you do not have, you cannot set flow filters to affect the values of flow fields, for example. And also, there is no user interaction. So when you call a function, which results in, for example, a confirmation dialog, it simply stops. It says that callbacks are not allowed. So let me demonstrate a quick one to see how those web services actually work in NAV 2013. All the demos are on 2013 RTM. So here I have prepared the demos. I have one code unit which is called Hello World Management. It has a single function which is called Hello World, which simply returns a message, which is just a rendering of the same text in 3 languages. It is basically Hello World, today is this date, is this true, yes or no. So let's take a look how this works from RTC. So when I click this Hello World and my RTC is in English, then I get an English response. If I change my language to, for example, Danish, and I click Hello World, or actually Hi Verden, or whatever it is, it tells me the same thing in Danish. Okay. Then I have a small application here. You will have to trust me on the fact that I've actually connected this to this web service. So I run this thing and click the Hello World button. It does the same thing. It simply calls this function from the Hello World Management code unit. So let's click this Hello World. So it says Hello World. I switch to German. And again, I click Hello World here. It's Hello Welt now, but in this small utility, it's still Hello World. So it does not take any of those language changes. Okay. So this was also a very, very small and tiny demonstration of how web services work. You've probably all seen something like that already. This thing, when you see all those limitations in perspective, are very good for machine-to-machine communication, for interfaces. Because you don't care what the language is when you're using interfaces. You just exchange data. But when you have interactions with users, all those limitations do kick in. And then you have to do something about them. Why does this matter at all? So interfaces are system-driven. So it's something that the system starts on its own, depending on a schedule or system events or whatever you define. Also, interfaces are typically asynchronous, which means that you do not care if they happen at the same time. For example, you create a new customer in one database. You don't care if it is created immediately, synchronously, in another database. Whereas, if you're working on an iPad client or something that you develop, like a web page, which creates a new customer, you would prefer that the customer actually appears immediately. So, typically, user interactions are synchronous. Then, when you're using interfaces, you typically have a single user context, which means you don't care about security. You have one account which exchanges the data, and that account is basically allowed to do all the things that you designed the interfaces to do. However, with user interactions, you cannot have a single account. Or if you do, then you have to implement another security layer. You can choose to depend on NAV's security layer, which means that you authenticate against web services and actually work within web services in the context of your user account. This is something that is not necessary for interfaces. Then, for integrations and interfaces, you have no interaction. There are no questions like, do you want to copy this customer to that database? I mean, if you program it to copy, it will copy. If you program it to skip it, it will skip it. But with user, like you click release an order and it asks you, do you want to release this order? Or it asks you, like, do you want to post an invoice or do you want to ship or invoice or both? You expect an answer. The system typically cannot make an answer for you. Or if you develop it that way that it does provide an answer, then you are limiting basically the user scenarios that you can cover. And also, interfaces do not care about language, whereas you typically do want your application to work in your language. So, interfaces are what web services are in fact designed for. They work perfectly for that thing. But when you take a look at the perspective of a business value, then the customers get the most value from user scenarios, from business process scenarios. That's something that web services basically do not provide, but do not provide as far or as well as an RTC client does. So let's take a look at at a demo. It's going to be a very small demo about fixing a very small, simple thing. And then we are going to build upon that as we go. So let me actually go to this Hello World management code unit again. When you run a web service call, the first thing that happens, do you know what it is? No matter what kind of web service that is, it still goes into the code unit 1, and it still executes all of the logic that would be executed if you run or start a new session from within, for example, a role-tailored client. So let me go to code unit 1, and let me actually add one more line of code into the company open function. So I'm going to use this web service management variable, which I have predefined, and I'm going to use apply language option. So what does this apply language actually do? It checks if we are actually in a non-GUI scenario, because we don't want to do that from role-tailored client. Then we read the personalization record for the user account. If we find that one, we apply the language. So I'm going to save code unit 1, and I'm going to make sure that I'm here in German. And when I click my hello world, it should say hello Welt. And basically, if I switch back to English, it will now work in English. So a very simple thing. It's just to show that you can influence web services. Sometimes doing small things like this is very easy, or like a minor thing, or sometimes by doing larger, wider things with them. So I'm going to give you a couple of quick tips, which I'm not going to demonstrate. You will just have to take it for granted, and you can test it later on. So first quick tip is never change the names of the parameters of functions that you call. And also never change the names of the controls in the pages that you call from web services. When you do that, you have to rebuild your proxy class to be able to recall that service again. Pages will not crash, they will just skip any value that you pass which was changed, and function calls will just give you an error. So there are going to be a couple of more of those. Okay, let's take a look at a deeper example. Let's combine web services with .NET framework, and then we have this larger Godzilla. We're going to get to that largest one. So how does .NET help? What does it provide to us that we didn't have before? So first, it provides a rich stack of functionality. CL is limited language. .NET is, I wouldn't say unlimited, but it's pretty unlimited compared to what CL can do alone. And what is very good with CL is it integrates .NET. So you can, let's say, code in CL Sharp or CL.NET, whatever you want to call it, basically calling any .NET functionality from within CL. First thing that we are going to do is take the limitation from the web services and make them stateful. So make sure that web services actually retain any state that you want them to retain. Okay? So how do we do that? First thing, we employ static classes. So static classes have one single instance per application domain in .NET, which means that NAV service tier, which is one application domain across all services it provides, will provide an environment for hosting static classes, which means you can retain things between calls. So let's take a look at a quick demo about this as well. So I'm leaving my code unit 1, and I'm going into this web service management. And here, I'm actually, I have one static class. Let me show you that class first. So I'm stopping my demo, opening the static class. So we have two classes in this project. One of those classes is static, which means there's going to be only one instance residing in the application domain for the NST. And we have a non-static class, which has exactly the same signature. However, you have to instantiate that one. Another difference is that you do not have to instantiate static classes. So when you have this set static value method, it basically calls this static class and sets value to whatever you send from the outside world. And when you get the static value, it returns that one. And also, if you set a non-static value, first, I want to simulate or demonstrate that actually any state is lost between calls. So I check if it's instantiated, and if it is not, I instantiate one. But it doesn't make any sense because it will die as soon as you end your session. So let me demonstrate how this works. So I run this. Here I have two sets of buttons and boxes where I can show a static value. When I click that, I get nothing. It says the static value is empty. And also, when I show value, which is non-static, I also get an empty string. However, here I can click like, for example, static value is hello mibuso, and say set static value. And click this again, and it tells me hello mibuso. If I do that here, and say set value, and say show value, it's still empty because every single call is re-instantiating this, this class. Let's take a look at the RTC. So this is a different session altogether. However, I click here on show static value, and it will tell me hello mibuso, because it reads the static value which was set from web services. Also, if I change it here into something else, like hello world, and say set static value, I immediately see it from here. Okay. So this was a quick thing about setting a static value. I have one more thing to demonstrate here. So instead of reading this personalization record, which is probably not what you want to do from web services, you want to have web client and RTC client using a different set of languages than for web services. Maybe you want to control that using those static values, basically retaining some state. So instead of using this, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this static and use this value to keep, did I actually want to do that? Actually, yes. So let me use this set static value, which sets value, and here I'm going to declare an integer. Just a second. I've made a mistake. Or is it? So I'm going to declare yes, I apologize. Yeah, that's true. And T. Okay, so basically it means that it's going to set the language from my static variable. So I'm going to pass the value of 1031 and set the static value, and then click help. Oops. Yes, I know what it is. Just a second. I'm going to first comment that, run that. Now I have my, just a second again. Okay, so when I show that, it's now 1031. I'm going back here and using this. And when I click hello world, it will show hello world. Oh, it's, yes, just a second. Let me, no, I think I am forgetting global language and integer. And now when I call hello world, it's going to be in German. If I use, sorry, and then click hello world, it's in Danish. And if I use 1033, it's English. So it's now different from the language that you have in the RTC. Okay. So let's talk about other things. How do we make use of those, of the state that we can set between the calls? So instead of calling simple functions like this, that we just call a function in the web service, we replace that with a call sequence where we make one call which establishes a state for us. Then we call the original function, which does something and makes use of the state. And then we close the sequence, which clears the state, not to retain anything for future calls. So this is more like what happens when the user clicks a function. So there is a transaction that happens, which has some interaction with CAL and the database, and it executes, it maybe interacts, it has one state, and then it stops when the execution stops. Either with an error or with a success, the state is again lost for that transaction. So this is simulating that model for us. When can we call these sequences? We can call them, for example, to overcome those limitations of languages. We can call them, for example, to set flow filters. We can store the flow filters in state with the first call. Then we can call the page service which applies the flow filters from the state. And then we can just show the data which is filtered by flow filters. We can, for example, set request page options or report filters with this. So you call, you start the session, you set some filters, and then report reads them from the state and applies them. I'm not going to demonstrate this, it will take a lot of time, but trust me, you can do this. Okay, and then last thing, which we are also going to see last today, is managing the interaction with the user. So to overcome that fact that web services cannot, in fact, interact. So to enable you to actually use confirm or STR menu or even page runs. Okay, I think that at this stage I wanted to demonstrate this thing with the languages, so I'm going to skip this demo. Let me talk about another thing. So, about NAV-to-NAV integration. So, has anybody ever had to send data from one instance of NAV to another instance of NAV, be it two different companies in the same database or two different databases? Let me see your hands. Okay, was it always easy, or? It depends, yeah. So, NAV-to-NAV integration is a situation when you are integrating processes between different NAV instances. So, no matter what they are. They are typical in, for example, business-to-business processes. For example, you have a customer, one company, who is ordering goods from another company, and both of them are on NAV, and you actually want to integrate, like, for example, placing a sales order, and then calling basically creating a purchase order when you release the sales order, or stuff like that. Then, for example, you can have intercompany postings, like you post a payment, then another company receives the payment, or you post an invoice, another company posts an invoice, and stuff like that. Then you may have central master data repositories, a very typical scenario. Like you have one company which stores all customer information, and when you change the address, it replicates across all of the companies. Okay, there are easier ways to do that if it's in the same database, but it's different databases, then it's a little bit more difficult. And there are many, many more scenarios. I'm pretty sure whoever raised their hand now, you probably had another scenario. So SOAP web services make this possible. Let's take a look how this thing typically works with NAV 2009 and 2013. So first thing that you do is you publish a web service on the publishing instance. This is the target. Then you have several steps that you have to do on the instance which is going to call that, which is first, you have to develop a .NET consumer class. It doesn't have to be .NET, it can be anything, but you have to develop that which connects to the web service. Then you have to deploy that, and then you have to write CAL code which consumes this class that consumes the web service. So who has done something like that? basically whoever raised their hand that you have done something with web services should also be raising your hand right now, because most of you have done that. That's what we do. We go to Visual Studio, say new service reference or new web reference, whichever you prefer, and just define a proxy class and use it. That's how it's done. I'm going to give you a quick tip here. When you are doing NAV-to-NAV integration, you cannot achieve really full transactional integrity because of the commit function that can happen on the other end. But always call the web service last. So first execute everything on current instance, then call the web service. And then if it fails, you fail. If it succeeds, you succeed, provided that there are no commits in between. Let's take a look at a better way of doing that. So why would we have to do all of this? Because if you change something at a publishing instance, everything changes on the consuming instance. So you have to change the consumer as well, which may again be 3 steps. So instead of that, how about this? You just write CAL code to consume and have a web service. Okay. What I'm going to show now is a generic web service consumer. This is a single object which can connect to multiple web services. So you don't have to create a reference. So it can call any page web service. It can do those reads and deletes and updates, whatever you could do with consuming the web service directly. And you don't have to develop any .NET consumer classes or proxy classes. And you will do it by using pure CAL. So you don't even have to deploy an object on a server. So let's see a demo to see how this would work. So I'm going into NAV, and here I have a pseudocode. I hope you can read this. Is this too small? So I cannot compile it, of course. So wouldn't it be nice if you could do stuff like that? Like, say, connect, provide the URL, then say initialize, then set the values, and then say create. Okay? And whichever service that is, it would work. Who would like that? I expected something like that. Thomas, you're not liking that, so. Okay, so what if I told you this is not actually pseudocode? So let me declare this web service variable. And compile this. So what this guy is going to do, it's going to connect to another instance of NAV, which I have here, which is Cronus. Let me see why it is not connecting to that instance. So I have 2 instances. This one is Cronus. Okay. So I'm checking the customers. At the end, the last ones are these. So when I run this code, it will actually do it from another instance, and it will tell me that what am I? No, sorry, wrong one. I scrolled a little bit. So I run this generic consumer. Okay, demo guys again. So I probably have to publish the web service first. So let me go to web services here and create a new one. And I run that thing again without any recompilation or anything. It now tells me that I just created customer number C20 in another NAV instance, and we can verify that. We go here to customers, and here we have Navtechdays. So what did we say this, or instruct this code unit to do? We said name should be Navtechdays 2012, blocked should be ship, and credit limit should be 10,000, and this is basically what we have got in the customer card. So a very simple thing of calling another web service. So there is no magic here in the background. Let me actually connect to this Cronus instance, and let me import a set of objects, which is a table and a page. So, okay, it's this licensing issue with RTM. So here I have an empty table, which has just two fields, code and description, and those two fields are published from a page. So I will simply take this dummy web service text, which I've prepared, and I'm going to add that here at the beginning. So it exits, it doesn't recreate the customer. So I save that. When I run that code unit again, it should fail because we don't have that web service. So it says that there is internal server error. So when I publish the web service in this instance and say this is page 50,001 and I say its service name is dummy, publish that, and I say OK, and run it from here, it will now create something in this other instance. Okay, I will run the page again, and it has 2 rows inside. So a very simple thing of actually calling anything. Let me show another demo, what else you could do, for example. Let's connect again back to the customer page. And let's have a loop, like connect to customer page, set filter on name to show only those which have A, and then read multiple, and then repeat as long as we have something in a data set, and then show the customer name, number, and balance. So I run that. It reads from another database. So it tells me customer this. So this one has no balance, this one has some balance. You could, of course, set more filters like show me only those with balance. So I would get only 2 now, first and second. So that's what you could do with those generic web services, so generic consumers. So how did we do that? So what does this consumer do? So it has several steps that it goes through. So it does most of the things that Visual Studio would do for you. So it goes and connects directly to the WSDL document. It reads it. Then it imports that into a code namespace, which it then translates into C# code, which it then compiles into memory and keeps basically a proxy assembly with all of the classes that you have, service class, entity class, filter class, lines class, whichever. And then you simply write CL code to consume that. And it does a simple trick using a .NET reflection to assign property values and to call methods. So no real magic, you don't have to deploy anything. It's a very powerful thing that .NET can do for you. So let's take a look at this code unit to see how big it actually is. So this connect method simply establishes the web request, imports the service description, then it imports that into code namespace, translates it into C#, then adds some assembly references to the C# code that's generated, compiles it, and simply stores the assembly in a local variable, which is global. Sorry, not local, global variable for this code unit, which is then available to all of other methods in this code unit. Then you have detect types class, which simply detects all of the methods and types that you're using, like line, service, filter, or fields classes. Then it detects the methods. It tells you if you try to connect to code unit web service because it does not have like uniform signature. And then you basically have a series of methods which are very simple, just setting some properties or calling methods using .NET Interrupt. So no deployment, nothing. When a web service target changes, you simply change a line or 2 of code in CL. So I hope you like this. This is going to be available on Mibuso, so you could download it and use it yourself for whatever purpose. Thank you. Okay, let me show you one more example of this. Basically, like intercompany, not exactly posting, but a little bit more of a business-to-business integration. So here in the release sales document code unit, I've added a little bit of code So when you release a sales document, it connects to the purchase order service on another instance. And it basically initializes a new purchase order. Okay, you don't have direct one-on-one mapping between customer vendor numbers and item numbers between two business entities ever. But this is a simplified thing. You could implement that mapping if you wanted to. So here you have like, you first establish which vendor it is by reading the customer number from our system. Then we filter the lines, and then for each line, we create a new line which copies the necessary information about the purchase order, type, number, and quantity. And then it basically creates that and tells us which purchase order is created in another instance. So I'm going to this first instance, which has sales orders. I'm going to create a new one. So it tells me there is some balance for this customer. Oops. Let me try another one. I think it's going to crash again for some reason. Okay, there is a compilation error. This sometimes happens. You have to compile this code unit for some reason. I don't know why, but it's probably a bug. Maybe I'll file it on Mibuso if I remember. Okay, I'm going back to sales orders. I create a new sales order for this customer. Let me basically restart the clients and then recompile this. Okay. I've tested all of these demos. You may trust me or not, but it's funny that it's now crashing. It's okay. Okay, now it's good. So I will buy a bicycle in quantity of 5. I will buy another bicycle, 7 of these, and this one is not in stock. And I will I'm selling, not buying, 15 of those back wheels. And I'm simply releasing this. So, okay, again, I did not publish the web service, so it complains. I have to go to another instance and publish this web service. I'm going back here and so you see this? It failed. So it did not release the sales order because it's the last thing that happens. So transaction failed at another end, so it fails here as well. So I release it again. And it tells me like purchase order 106,026 is created in another system. So let me verify that. So I will go to purchase orders and take a look at this 106.26. It's for vendor 20,000 and it has these 3 items, 5, 7, and 15. So that's basically kind of the things that you could do with this generic web service consumer. Okay, there is one more tip I'm going to give you. The proxy classes are not localized. So no matter what global language you set for your, let's say, call sequence, proxy classes are always created in English. So, or basically, I would have to see in a non-English language because English is default everywhere. But it's always in English. So if you want to localize, for example, option values, or if you want to localize like field names or something, then you would have to read metadata. So you can use object metadata for that. That table contains blob fields, which are XML, which you can just read into an XML using .NET interoperability again, and then parse and go through them and do whatever you need to retrieve that extra data that you might be needing. Okay, And now let's get to this last thing, which is combining .NET plus web services plus testability. So let's take a look what this is about. So let's expand on that call sequence that we constructed a little bit earlier. So first thing, we initiate the call sequence, which means we will establish a state on the server. And then this thing that we call just execute work or call the function is a little bit larger. So first step, it calls the code. That code can encounter a question like confirmation or str menu, or even it could like store a message or show a message or run a page in modally or something like that. So when that happens, or sorry, at this moment, if the code does not encounter anything like that, it simply continues and completes the call sequence. And the session is, or virtual session is gone. However, if there is a question, then first we check, do we have an answer to this question? So do we know the answer? For example, do you want to post this invoice? And then you check in your state, do we know the answer to this question? And at the first call, you don't. So what do? You basically ask the user that question. Like, okay, do you want to post that? And then you store the answer into the state and recall the same function. And then it again hits the question, goes to that step which says 2D, like, is answer available? And now, yes, it is. So we read the answer from the state, apply to the question, and continue execution of the code. So a little bit complicated. We're going to see how that actually works from, or how testability actually allows that. So a quick refresher about testability feature. I'm pretty sure, and Thomas, you will probably confirm that, Microsoft has never intended you to use testability framework for things like that. But you can. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to change, because changing how that layer works would have to change a lot of things for probably Microsoft's thousands of unit tests. So I'm pretty sure, at least for the time being, you can depend on what I'm going to show. So a little bit about the testability framework. First, you have test code units, which contain test functions. Test functions contain test code, which is verifying if something works or doesn't work as expected. And those functions have a neat feature, which is handlers. So you can attach a handler, like a confirmation handler. So instead of running a confirm function, you get a handler. So if you have a confirm function within a web service call, the web service crashes. So let me quickly demonstrate that. If you have never seen that, let me just show how that thing works. So I'm going to this hello world management, and instead of this exit, I'm going to say, if not confirm, are you sure? Then exit. Okay. So if I call that, it crashes by telling me callbacks are not supported on Microsoft Dynamics NAV Business Web Services. So to overcome that, I don't know what I've clicked right now. Okay. To overcome that, you can use a test function. And instead of actually calling confirm, you could call confirm handler, which then does whatever you want it to do, like provide the response back to the caller that there is in fact a handler happening. So then you have test runner code units, which run the test code units, and they help you control, do you want to execute a test or not? And they help you retrieve the result, like did this test succeed or was there an error? So how do we apply that framework to this extended call sequence? So it allows us to intercept things which would normally cause errors, as you have just seen. So you have three handlers which you can easily just consume, let's say so. First is a confirm. So whenever confirm hits, you just store or basically intercept that and handle the interaction. Then you have str menu, which is another one, somewhat common. And then you have message, because web services simply ignore messages. If you have a message function, it is just ignored. You never get that back to the caller. So we would probably want to store the message in the state, and then before end call, retrieve the messages and show them to the user. Maybe user is interested to know which purchase order was created, or like, was this released or not, or whatever messages happen in the system. You could also handle page run or report run. It's kind of trickier, you know, because in those scenarios, you would typically want to know which page can run. So it's not as generic as those three are, but still, if you want, you can handle them. So let's think of a generic solution. What would the solution have to do to accomplish all this? So first, you would have to put all web service code into test functions. Okay? Then you would have to hook handlers from those functions, like confirm handler and message handler, whatever. Then those handlers call back to the client, whichever application you're writing. And then you basically, instead of calling the original function, you call the test function, which then executes in test mode and provides whichever functionality you designed it to do. However, there are problems. There are 4 groups of problems with this approach. First is, you cannot call back from web services, because as soon as you try, say something to the caller, I mean, the transaction either completes if you just exit with some kind of a return value, or if you have an error, it's just an error, okay? Then, if you hook a handler, the handler must execute. So you must make sure that if you have a function and it does not actually run a handler, you have to handle that situation as well. Then, if you have multiple test functions and all of them have to hook to different functions and handle the situation that handlers may not have been called, that may result in code duplication and inconsistencies and errors, bugs, whatever. And then you would have to write real test code units to test that thing. So it would be nice to see to write test code units to test code units. And then last thing, you cannot call a test function in test mode. So if you call a test function from a non-test environment, it's not run as a test function, it's run as a normal function. So you can only run test functions if you run a test code unit itself, or if you run it from a test runner. So let's take a look at how we will overcome all of those. So we're going to have 4 demos. I hope we will have time. And I've tried to basically prepare demos for that, but I just didn't manage because of time. So we'll have to improvise a little bit here. So let's take a look at the first solution. So callbacks are not allowed. Yes, of course they are not, but errors are. And whatever the error returns is up to us to decide. So instead of passing real errors, we pass so-called signal errors. The errors which are not actual errors, which will abandon or roll back the transaction at the web service tier, but will let us do something. Because when we receive an error on the client side, we can do whatever we want with that. And NAV service tier is doing that thing all the time with SQL Server. SQL Server is generating error after error when you, for example, call simple thing like find first and then you do next. Okay, maybe in 2013 not, but earlier it did. So NAV service tier is hiding those errors from you. So they are error, but technical error, not user level error. So you can do the same. You can establish this signal which tells your application that there is some situation which happened which requires the attention of the client, but not necessarily of the user. Okay? And then from the client, you capture those signal errors, and you throw anything that is not a signal error. So if there is an actual error, you just throw it because it's an actual error. Then you process those signals on the client end. And then you store the results of the interaction. Like, there is a confirm error, you send this signal confirm, do you want to do something? Then the client simply shows this confirmation dialog, and you say yes. And then you call your state management and say, store this value for me, please. And then, now you have that answer in state. You recall the function, and then your handler reads, okay, I have the answer to this question in state, reads it from state, applies it, and goes on. And there you have your virtual confirmation on the server side. So let's take a look at this. So I have one set of classes here which are basically a state manager. So this state manager consists of a static class called state manager, which manages the state for me. I think it's on screen. Yep. So Right now, it keeps some kind of list of sessions. This is this list of all sessions currently running on the service tier. This is virtual sessions, not NAV sessions. Then we have a method which is called start session, which instantiates a session class. Session class has an ID, a user ID. It has some generic value, which I'm going to maybe show in some examples. Just ignore it for now. It has list of confirmations, because I'm going to show you how to handle this confirmation signal. And then it has this constructor. When you construct or instantiate a new instance of the session, it simply assigns the variables, instantiates the list of confirmations, stores itself in the session manager so that you have it available for state retrieval purposes. And then it has a couple of functions like hasAnswer, which is checking, do I have an answer for a question? And it returns a Boolean. And I have an answer function, which I use to provide an answer to a function. And then I store that answer in the session. Okay? So let's take a look at how we would handle that from CL. I'm going to be pretty generic. I'm not going to call some specific functionality like create a sales order. I'm just going to call a function which does something. So for that, I'm going to create a new code unit. So this one is going to be called web services functions. Okay? And in that web services functions, I'm going to declare that this is a test code unit, okay? And then I'm going to declare a new method, which is called do some work, okay? And that do some work receives two parameters, like A and B, both of type integer, and it also returns an integer, okay? And here we would, for now, just exit with A plus B. Okay. I didn't read the message. Okay, no, sorry, I apologize for that. Yeah, we cannot put anything in here. I will have to pass that from the state. So I will, for now, I will just add this state manager variable, which is going to be a .NET of my own. And, sorry, not that one, but the state manager from classes. Okay, so here I'm going to use this generic value. Sorry, one more thing. I have to establish the session. I have another code unit for that, but I will actually here add another variable, which is going to be of type session. Again, from the same assembly. Here, and it's going to be the session. And here I'm going to say that session is state manager get session from my user ID. And then I'm going to exit with session dot generic. Sorry, again, I cannot have this. I can say that session generic value is session I'm going to put some text at the end. So I'm basically going to append more text to this function. So this is do some work function. It is a test function. So if I run this code unit, it basically will tell me that it has failed because it cannot retrieve a session from a session manager. So let's take a look what could we do from web services. So I have another code unit here which is called web service management. sorry, it's, sorry, sequence manager, where I have start session, end session, has answer, answer, and set generic value and get generic value functions. So I'm going to interact with that session a little bit. So at this stage, I'm going to go back to my demo application, and I'm going to add some code to this form. I'm going to add another button, and I'm going to just call it confirm. So here I will, on click of this, sorry, it's a copied button, so I have to remove the event first. On the click of this button, I'm basically going to call sequence management okay. So I establish the sequence management. Then I call management.start session. Okay. Then I call management.set, where is the, just a second, sequence manager, set, get. It seems to be missing from here, so I will refresh the proxy class. Okay. Okay, set generic value, and I will set it to something. And then at the end, I'm going to call this end session. So this is the first thing that I do. So at this stage, I have a call sequence established. I have a start call, I have an end call. So these two things basically establish a state and clear the state. So whatever I do in between on web services will be aware of the state that I have established. So let's do another web service call. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to publish, or I'm going to create a new wrapper here. So here I'm going to create test wrapper code unit, which has a function which is called append value. And this append value is simply going to call that test function. However, to call the test function, we have to have a test runner. So I will have to establish a test runner which will run the test function. So here I leave this stay for a while. And then I create runner. And I say that this is of subtype test runner. This one, when you run it, it simply says code unit.run. So this is, 22. Apologize, 21 is the test function. Okay, when I run this runner, it will run this test function. So we can see that when I run the runner, it tells me that there is a failure, exactly the same one. So from this regular function, which is called append value, which is going to receive a parameter, the parameter is called t, it's of type text. So here, I'm going to actually put that, I've messed this a little bit because I only have one value, but never mind, I will try to demonstrate the concept anyway. So I'm going to say that I'm running the test runner, so code unit.run and 50,023. So this one does nothing but simply running a test runner, okay? So here I will put this append value back into the state. So I will say that I have a session which is of .NET type and I have state manager, which is static. Okay? So now we retrieve the state and simply say that session and I run the code unit. So what happens here when I call this code, this function from web services? It stores something into state, then it runs the test runner runs the test code unit, and the test code unit executes some logic. Okay? So at this stage it's going to be very simple. I'm going to expose this test wrapper as a code unit, and I'm going to connect to that one. So I'm creating a new reference. So it has one single method. So I will call it simply wrapper. So here, in between those sequence begin and end, I will say that wrapper.wrapper is new wrapper. Again, it uses default authentication. And then I call, okay, append value test. Okay, I will probably want to return something from here. So I will define this and say exit session.generic value, because something will happen with the generic value here in this test run. I'm going to refresh the wrapper. And I'm going to say that I'm show the result. Okay, so when I run that, when I click on this confirm, at this stage, it simply says something test called. So it did what I said. Like it first said something, then it added test, and then it added this called. Okay? And this was a single call. So when I call it again, it doesn't reappend stuff because it's a new sequence. So I have a completely new state. Okay, so what if I use this in this function here, and I say, if confirm, do you want to append text? What will happen? So when I click this button again, I'm going to get, one more thing here. So let me explain what actually happened in the background. The test runner happened. So the test runner, which ran, it received the error, but it doesn't bubble up the error for you. So if you want to bubble the error up, you have to handle that in here. So let's do that. So for that, we are going to create a function which is called onAfterTestRun. This function is going to have some parameters. Code unit ID. Code unit name, function name, and success. So when a test run executes, it will receive the results of a test run. And then we can do something with those results. So if there was an error, success will be false. If everything succeeded, success will be true. So let's actually say if not success, then I actually want to bubble the error up. So I simply say error, get last error text. Okay? So at this stage, The test runner will not hide the error from me, but will actually bubble it up. So let's take a look. I run this, say confirm, and now it fails with unhandled UI confirm. So it wants something to happen, a confirmation dialog. And it is not handled. If you have a test function which executes a function and you don't have a confirmation, or sorry, a handler for that kind of a function, then an error happens. So I must declare a UI handler for that. So let me go back into my test function, which is this one, and create confirm handler function. And I'm actually, oh sorry, no, this is the test runner. I'm going to the test this one. And I'm going to attach that handler to the handler function list of the function that I'm going to run from the test runner. And here on this handler function, I'm going to declare the type of confirm handler. Okay? So, if there is a confirm, this function runs. So here, what I could do is like say, the confirmation handler must have a signature. So let me attach that signature first. So it has a question, and it has an answer. Okay? So I can say answer is true. Okay? If I call that confirm, okay, the session exists. This is my bug, because let me actually first end the session for myself, because I'm still in the session. So, okay, now I have that. And if I change this to false, and I click this confirm, it doesn't append that value. So the confirmation handler has actually executed and done its work. Okay? So let's do this signal. So here within confirmation handler, we are actually going to use this session. Okay? I could have made this session a global variable, but sorry, Mark, don't complain about that. Next time. And I will actually say, if session has answer on question, then answer is session get answer to question. I think I can do that. Let me check the signature of this session. Properties. Oh, I did not add that method, so let me actually add that first. I apologize for that. It's going to require a restart. So I'm going to use this session class. Oh, public bool get answer. And I'm simply going to, well, I'm going to be faster typing. Return confirmations, first or default, that confirmation which has question equal to question, and it responds with an answer. Okay? And actually I have to use double marks here. So I rebuild that. Now I have this get answer method. That will require me to do a couple of restarts. So I'm closing everything I have. First saving that, closing that, and here, just make sure it's recompiled. And I have this redeploy, which will redeploy this method. Okay. So I'm going to start my Navtechdays demo. License. Okay, I can develop in beta license, but I cannot run in beta license. That's funny. So let me actually go back to this web service functions. So here, answer is session get answer of question. Okay? So if I find an answer, I return that answer. If I don't find an answer, then I simply send a signal. So I say else error, and then I will do something like signal confirm, and then the question. Okay? So let's take a look at how this will behave in the demo. I'm going into demo. First thing that I'm going to do is wrap this properly into a sequence. So I will say a try here, and I will say I would add a finally here. So whatever happens, I get my. And I'm also going to add a catch block. Okay? And this catch is going to catch any exception. Okay? So here, for now, I'm simply going to say message box.show and then ex.message, and then I'm going to add some caption as error, and then some message box buttons, which are okay. So I simply show the error. So I run that, confirm, and it tells me integer must not be blank. Integer is missing or invalid in the expression. I did not expect that one, actually. So now it would, okay, there is something else happening. Start session. Let me see if I have made a mistake somewhere here. Code unit 1, exactly. Yes, I've restarted that. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm simply going to change my code unit 1, take this thing out. So ahead of time. This shouldn't have been reserved for this, like questions and answers. You're welcome. Thank you. Okay. Let's go back to this wrapper now. It should work, hopefully. So I run that, say confirm, something test. Okay, I have to add my code back. So if I don't have an answer, I will ask for one. Okay, so I click this confirm and I get signal, confirm, and then question. Okay, so what do I do here? So let's establish basically a loop which does this. So I'm entering into this code. So basically I'm going to start the session outside of the try loop, because if it fails, then I must not close it. And then within the loop, I'm actually going to do this. And here, I'm going to do something, which is, it's going to be basically a very simple thing. I should add another loop. I should abstract it into another function, which would have all of those try catches and everything. But for now, let's just make a very simple thing. So just to provide a proof of concept for that. So here, I will actually have to check if ex.message starts with, and then I do something else. Okay? So here I will say message box.show, and then I will actually say ax.message substring. Did anybody count all of those already? 18. Okay, 18. and then it's confirmation, and then it's buttons, yes, no, cancel, and so this thing will now return a dialog result. So I will simply add here management.answer, and we'll answer I don't need cancel. See. Sorry? Okay, let me, I can't hear you and I'm missing something pretty obvious, so I'm going to first assign a Boolean value to that, and I'm going to answer on that B. And there is, sorry? Yeah, that's true. So it's okay. So I provide the answer. You should not be doing this here, but I'm just, for the sake of demonstration, because I'm losing far too much time, and I'm okay. So confirm, didn't count them properly, so I have to start with $20. I will have to end session. Okay, do you want to append text? I say no, it shows me this. Okay, never mind. I click confirm. Do you want to append text? Yes, and it appends the text. So, okay, I have a couple of more bugs, but I'm not going to clean up this. I will make sure to put all of those demos again on Mibuso, including these classes and everything, so you will be able to do it yourself. So this is basically the principle of how you would be handling things like that. So let's talk about another problem, which is if we have a handler which does not execute. There is a very simple solution. At the end of a function, you simply execute all of the handlers. Just call confirm with blank string, message with blank string, str menu with blank string, and at the beginning of a handler, you just check if this is the end of the call or is it an actual handler. So I'm not going to demonstrate that. It's actually a very simple thing, very simple workaround. About code duplication and inconsistencies, also the solution is very simple. I'm going to quit or skip talking about that. You basically create one function, which is a test function, and all other functions as regular or normal functions. And then you call those normal functions. Those normal functions store the function name in the state. Then call the test runner, which calls the test, which is case wrapped, which calls the function itself in test mode, which is a nice trick. I have a demo for that prepared. I will not now upload it here because I don't know if it will run, so I will tweak it a little bit. And finally, we have calling test functions from web services. I've actually shown that already. So we've seen how to do that. Basically, you have to call a function which calls the testability framework. And with that, you basically can overcome most of limitations. I could easily write a message handler which intercepts a message, stores it in the state, and then end call retrieves all messages and shows them in sequence, for example. For that, you have an example in my blog how to actually pass strongly typed data between client and a server, like a list of strings or something, and easily reinstantiate it on both instances. So it would help here. And again, the demo has been shown. So at this stage, we actually go to questions and answers. So, thank you. Yes. Just a second, microphone.
You showed us how to use the method from external, for example, C# classes. Just use this, and you directly can call the method. My question is, do we have a possibility to use some statement from C#, for example, for each or something else? If not, are you planning to add this possibility?
Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if you have all heard questions. The question, it is about, can you use other C# constructs like for each, for example? Yes and no. So for each is a construct in C# which depends on enumerators. So it has two interfaces, I enumerable and I enumerator, which help you enumerate. So when you have a for each, the compiler, or actually I'm not sure which layer that is, checks if it is enumerable. First compiler, then the runtime. And then, basically, if it is, it iterates through the enumerator. And you could do that. So you could take the enumerator from the class using CAL and then do not for each, but repeat until, or while end. Okay? So the question was good. So there are many other constructs which C# supports, which CAL does not. One memorable or worth mentioning is the fact that you cannot use extension functions. Like, for example, link. Who is familiar with link in .NET? You can't use it from CAL because extension functions are not implemented. I hope it happens. Thomas, this is a nice to do for you. Okay, you're welcome. Any more questions? Yep, over there. Just a second, let's take a mic.
We have quite a few commercial implementations using web services. Have you had any experience of load balancing them to give them scalability and get performance improvements?
Not exactly. So web services do impose some overhead. However, I mean, I did do some performance testing, and I did not notice that it seriously degrades performance. But about load balancing, certainly not. I unfortunately don't have much experience about that. So, audience, does this question deserve a shirt? Okay. You must leave one shirt for me, you know. I'm kidding. Okay, any more questions? Ooh, it's two shirts for me. So I think that the question was, what size is the shirt? Well, some size. One size, yeah, one size fits all. It's actually L. I won't fit it in anyway, so. Okay, any more questions? Yep. Mm-hmm. No. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Yeah, can you or should I? Okay, so the question was, sometimes a web service hits a timeout, but the data is still written. So I don't have a comment on that. I assume it happens because the web service tier is waiting for a while, and it simply probably commits or resumes execution, but stops, basically prevents the caller to wait more. I'm not sure what happens exactly. Never encountered that, so I can only assume what happens. Here's the shirt. You're welcome. Okay, one more question.
How we can debug a web service?
I think that has been demonstrated already. So you go into, there are two things actually you can do. First is, if you go to Tools, Debugger, Debug Session, and then, well, when it starts, you click Debug Next. And then you say break, and then you run this and call the web service, so it breaks. That's one thing. Another thing, if you actually want to debug that .NET interoperability, because .NET variables are not really too useful in the debugger because you cannot drill down into their properties. So you could actually set the debug allowed flag on the service tier, open the class file in C# in Visual Studio, attach Visual Studio to the service tier, and then debug that. I demonstrated that concept last year during .NET interoperability session, so you may just go to Mibuso, download that, and see how it works. Actually, it was you, right? Okay. And that was the last shirt, so I will take the answers, but I can only take my shirt off, which is not going to be too good.
If you use the same static class within two node single instant code units, when does the static class go out of scope?
It doesn't.
Never.
So no, it simply dies when you stop the NST. You cannot take a static class out of scope. I mean, you could probably do something funky on .NET side, but normally you don't have to care about that. So the static class is instantiated the first time you access it. And then it stays in memory as long as your application domain stays in memory. You could try funky things like start a new application domain from your .NET code, which I'm pretty sure would fail. So I've tried to do some things with like intercepting the NST, like putting a different culture identity to it or something like that. You just cannot interfere with it, so it would prevent you from doing so. So nothing. Okay. Okay.
How do you manage the blob fields through web services?
How do you, sorry?
Manage
blob fields?
Yes.
Well, you have import and export functions on the blob field, which will import and export the data. So this is on the CL level. So when you call from web service, there are many things you could do, like, for example, base 64 encoding. So you pass the binary data as base 64 into the web service. And then you use .NET to decode it from base 64 into whichever binary it is, and then store that into using the import function on the blob field. So, for example, you could do other things as well.
Yeah, because the base string has some limitation when you have large fields. No?
No, there is no more limitations on text size. But even if they were, if you're still working with 2009, you could use big text anywhere where you're using text. So instead of making like text parameter on a function that you call from web service, you just put big text. It simply receives the text. And then you handle big text the normal way you handle big text in NAV. So no issues. Okay. One more question. You mean, possibly you mean two different users having to, this thing is not allowing you to do that. So you have to do some more smart processing about that. So some challenge response or something like that. I did not implement it here.
With the new security model, user ID is equals to what in web services?
It's equal to whoever authenticated against the web services. So in my code unit, I have the authenticate method, which I did not show, but it actually reads the setup from a table where I put my username and password. So it uses it has used my username and password all the time.
Okay, so it's not the account?
No. So you can make it use the account, or you can make it impersonate. So it's completely under your control. If that's it, then I have a couple of more slides, which are not going to be too funny. So, thank you for attending. I hope this was useful.